It has been over 9 months since beloved Friends actor Matthew Perry died at his home in Los Angeles, and even to this day, there has been unanswered questions over his apparent overdose. This week, it has been revealed that 5 people have been arrested and charged over the death of Matthew Perry. These include 2 doctors, Perry's live-in assistant, a male acquaintance, and a woman from North Hollywood known as the Ketamine Queen. Joining me now to discuss this is Dr Raj Persaud. Raj, thank you so much for joining me today. Now, you and I know that at the time of Matthew Perry's death, it was revealed that he had been undertaking this ketamine infusion therapy to treat his drug addiction and depression. But the autopsy then revealed that he had a lot more ketamine inside of him than the therapy he actually uses. What did this press conference from US Attorney Estrada reveal about how much ketamine the actor actually had inside of him?
Well, obviously, speaking as a doctor, this is a very shocking story for all sorts of reasons, but particularly because 2 doctors seem to be involved in mercilessly exploiting this poor man. Basically, ketamine is a drug that's been around since the early 1960s. It was synthesized in the early 1960s and is structurally, chemically very similar to phencyclidine, another drug of abuse quite commonly found in the 60s and 70s, otherwise known, the street name is angel dust. Now, the doses at which ketamine is administered, and it can be administered usually intramuscularly or intravenously, but it can be taken orally or it can actually be taken nasally so people can snort the stuff. The doses at which it's used recreationally are much, much higher than the doses that clinics use to treat depression. It's a very effective treatment for depression. Something like 70% of people respond. And we don't know if Matthew Perry may originally have gone for ketamine treatment properly at a proper clinic for depression. And actually, we know he has had alcohol problems. And actually, the research data suggests ketamine is very helpful for people with addiction problems. But we
Mm.
don't know whether what happened was gradually, maybe because he has an addictive personality, the doses went up and up and up. Because eventually, what happened was that although it was known he was taking ketamine and it's legitimate to take it for depression, the levels at which were found in his bloodstream in the post-mortem were way too high. And that's what seems to have triggered the police investigation.
Mm.
And it seems to me that this is a story, tragic story that's happened before. Michael Jackson's doctor, Dr. Conrad Murray, famously was being paid $150,000 a month by Michael Jackson to administer another anesthetic intravenously because Michael Jackson was suffering from chronic insomnia problems.
Yeah.
Interestingly, with the Michael Jackson case, he may have got on to be addicted to that anesthetic because of all the surgical procedures he had to alter his face. And because of that, that's how he may have ended up on the journey, the tragic journey that ended his life.
Yeah. Raj, I'll get back onto the similarities between this case and Michael Jackson's case a little bit later, but in Perry's final days, the indictment states that his assistant administered at least 15 shots of ketamine into him, and then the final 3 doses on that day that he died on October 28 last year. What does this amount of ketamine do to the human body?
Well, it's very, very dangerous and can obviously lead to death. Interestingly enough, it also leads to very high blood pressure, which can be very dangerous. And the evidence from what we know is that there was episodes in the past where his blood pressure did spike in a very dangerous way. So it's a very dangerous drug. It also has very nasty side effects taken in too high doses on your urinary system. It can cause ulcers in the bladder, for example. And so all sorts of unfortunate side effects can occur. We don't know if what happened is Matthew Perry being a celebrity, the power dynamic between him and his staff meant, and we've seen this before as a psychiatrist dealing with celebrities, meant that they felt maybe unable to say no to his requests. Addicts gradually escalate the dose because they habituate, they get used to smaller doses. It doesn't deliver the effect it first started off with. That happens with all sorts of drugs, like heroin, for example. And so gradually what happens, they're on an escalator ride of upping the doses, and basically someone has to say no to them. And
Mm.
maybe the staff around celebrities have difficulty saying no. We don't know the exact reasons why. these drugs were being administered towards the end. The personal assistant had no medical qualifications whatsoever to administer an injection, yet was doing this. We don't know if Matthew Perry became so desperate that that is also what led to some of these problems, because apparently the doctor turned up and gave him an injection in a car park while Matthew Perry was sitting in his car,
Yeah.
which suggests to me a huge amount of desperation,
There
perhaps
is
towards
so
the
much
end.
on that note that we don't know. There's so much speculation between the dynamics of the doctors and the assistant and the acquaintance and everyone involved in this. But Raj, the indictments showcases those text messages between the two doctors showing quite explosive language, indicating that the two were actually taking advantage of the actor. And on the note that we were talking about before with Michael Jackson, it does seem like a similar case. We saw that Dr. Conrad Murray was charged with involuntary manslaughter for providing those drugs that led to the singer's death. Do you see a situation playing out in a similar manner for these two doctors that have now been charged in relation to Perry's death?
Yes, and one of the text messages is incredibly disdainful, and it's really terrible for me as a doctor to see that. This doctor, I think, said something like, I don't know how much this moron is willing to pay. And I
Mm,
think what's revealing about that comment, because besides how nasty the person is at sending the message, is a very interesting power dynamic that occurs between celebrities and doctors. Celebrities are used to having power over people around them, they're used to people fawning on them, and they may be the case that a power dynamic often develops, as we saw with the Michael Jackson case, perhaps, and we've seen this in other cases, where the power dynamic means that doctors, unfortunately, find it difficult to say no to celebrities and are attracted to have celebrity clients. Maybe it helps build your private practice, for example, to have famous people on your books. And
mm,
so we get into a situation where the doctor, maybe for various reasons, doesn't say no to the celebrity. And that's a very dangerous situation. All
mm,
great medicine requires you to often say no and draw a boundary around various treatments to patients. And when the power dynamic changes so that the patient is able to get whatever they want, particularly if they have an addictive personality, there's going to be an extremely dangerous outcome, which tragically, we don't know the exact circumstances, maybe what's happened here and maybe what happened in the Michael Jackson case.
Raj, going back to that kind of difference between how much ketamine a doctor would use for ketamine infusion of therapy and how much was found inside of Matthew Perry's blood, it indicated that he was in the range used for general anaesthetic that a doctor would use when a patient was going under in a general surgery. So these doctors knew exactly how dangerous this amount was that he was taking. So can you walk me through the difference between how much a doctor would use for that infusion therapy that has become quite common for those being treated for depression, and how much was found in Matthew Perry's bloodstream?
Well, I don't know the exact numbers in the case that we're discussing, but I do know that there are clinics all over America that offer intravenous ketamine legitimately, but they're much, much lower doses. Basically, the kind of doses that recreational users are taking, people who are abusing it, are taking some things like 10 times the dose, what might be given intravenously for treatment of depression. The other problem is that given a clinic requires you to come in and administer the drug intravenously, it can be a lot of hassle. And celebrities maybe don't want to go to the clinic and have all the paparazzi and all the problems that occur. So maybe they insist the doctor comes to them and visits them at home. And now you can begin to see a slide into a problem, which is things that happen at home and outside of a clinic can be much more dangerous because it
Mm.
isn't oversight which occurs in a clinic. Um,
Right.
the point I want to make, though, is that it's a very effective treatment for depression. We're still doing research on it, so we still don't. It's not widely available over here in the UK and the NHS, but it is extremely dangerous, taken in very high doses. And what happens with most of these drugs is people habituate to it, and the doses escalate. So someone's got to say no, and this
Mm,
doesn't appear to have been what's happened here in this situation.
mm. Raj, we can't really speculate whether Matthew Perry okayed this amount of ketamine being given to him or whether it was a situation where he was being taken advantage of. But it does seem like there was this joint operation between these five people charged, these two doctors orchestrating what to get him, the queen of ketamine providing these drugs, and then the doctor literally providing these needles and teaching his assistant how to inject him with the ketamine with absolutely no medical background. So you could speculate that this was this joint operation to provide obviously a troubled and vulnerable actor with this amount of ketamine that ultimately killed him.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there's so many people are involved makes you a bit worried. To what extent was Matthew Perry in the middle, a victim in the middle of a ring of people who began to exploit him? To what extent was he really cognitively able to be aware of what's going on around him? He seems to have been a rather isolated individual. And because he didn't seem to have a close personal other person, a relative, or an intimate partner in the place with him that maybe would have protected him. He was isolated, and it is very interesting how isolated many celebrities get. Therefore, they become vulnerable to exploitation by not just as occurred in this case, not just one person, but a ring of people around him who were seems to be mercilessly exploiting him. And so I think it's isolation, and we see this a lot with celebrities, may have also contributed to the problem.
Mm. Dr. Raj Persaud, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.